right, everybody. Welcome in to Biscuits and SEC Live. This is our 12th show, so thank you all for joining us. I am Hammer, a.k.a. Hank. That is Bossman, a.k.a. Alex, my brother and co-host tonight. We've got a big show ahead with the first ever college football playoff games coming up this weekend, several of which will feature some SEC teams. So excited to get going this week. Before we jump in, as a reminder, if you're new here, just tuning in, we are Biscuits and SEC, football blog focused on the SEC. We do this live show once a week, Wednesday nights, 7:30 Eastern time. And you're also welcome to follow along on our blog online. We post some written stuff. If you're more into the written word, we've got a newsletter, as you can see below, that goes out twice a week during the season, Mondays and Fridays, just to keep you up to date with all the goings on in the SEC and around the country. So without further ado, Bossman, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great. Pumped to get into it tonight. We got a lot of fun stuff coming up. Bowl season is at hand, and that means this year in 2024, we've got the first iteration of the 12-team college football playoff, which we got a lot of fun matchups. Got some blue bloods in there as well as some newcomers, and we got folks. We'll talk about this right here. I see Bow Hunting 101's here with us tonight. What's up, guys? Go Vols. GBO, Bow Hunting 101. We'll talk about that game here in a little bit. So it'll be a lot of fun. We got, SMU, some newcomers. We got blue bloods like Clemson and Ohio State. And I don't know if you can call Tennessee a newcomer. It feels like 98 maybe in 2024. So we got a lot of fun stuff to talk about, including the portal, which is going crazy, and the calendar as well. We need to touch on that a little too. So a lot of fun stuff tonight.
Absolutely. And thanks for joining Bow Hunting 101. Stick around. We do have a deer story coming later on. So if you're into bow hunting or hunting at all, we've got a quick story to share there. But before we hop into that towards the end of the show, of course, we need to get into the college football playoff. So we've got opening round matchups kicking off this Friday night. Indiana at Notre Dame is going to be the first college football playoff game ever. Then on Saturday, a full slate: SMU at Penn State, Clemson at Texas, and Tennessee at Ohio State. Since we are a SEC-centric entity here at Biscuits and SEC, I think we ought to talk about the SEC teams first before we get to the SMU, Penn State, and Indiana Notre Dame game. So with that, I think we should dive into the Clemson number 12 seed at number 5 seed Texas in Austin. Texas is 12-point favorites right now. I think, just looking at the spreads now, that is the biggest opening line spread that we have. So Dabo and co will travel to Austin to take on the Longhorns, who have only lost this year to Georgia twice. And Clemson will see if they can keep this. Well, it's not even really a Cinderella run, but they had to win the ACC to get into this game. So we'll see if they can start a Cinderella run, let's say, with a win against the Longhorns. What are you looking at in this game, Bossman? What's catching your eye?
Well, the first thing is homecoming for Cade Klubnik. Coming back to Austin. He's a product of Austin Westlake. So it'll be fun to see him coming back here. And also they get to play Quinn Ewers. And folks who know Texas football know that Quinn Ewers and Cade Klubnik played in the state championship game years ago. Klubnik got the best of Quinn Ewers in that game. Quinn Ewers had a couple of interceptions in that game. So I'm excited to see that matchup again. I was excited when I saw that one pop up on the screen when the college football playoff was teams were announced, the matchups were announced. So I think that little storyline is fun to follow in the background. And the other thing I'm looking at is there's two things. One, obviously the Texas defense. The Texas defense has been carrying this Texas team all year, even though Texas has a ton of weapons, as we've talked about all year. It doesn't seem like for whatever reason they can get clicking, even with all those weapons. And they had a ton of yards, against Georgia last week through the air, but they weren't able to get it going on the ground. And then they shoot themselves in the foot with turnovers. And the Texas defense kept them in that game with Georgia, being able to hold them, in the second half and being able to just kind of hold Georgia to field goals for the most part. So the Texas defense, I'm interested to see that. Clemson has the fourth best scoring offense in the ACC. They can rip it around the yard. Cade Klubnik has played pretty well for the most part. But going up against an SEC defense in the South Carolina Gamecocks, they weren't able to score many points. So with a Texas defense, which is pretty obviously the best in the country, in my opinion, I'm interested to see what that looks like. And then on the other side for Texas, I want to see what's going on with their rushing offense. I want to see if they can get it going on the ground. I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot of what they try to do against Texas A&M, which was establish the run hard, and then utilize their passing game to supplement that. The reason I say that is because Clemson's rushing defense is not the Clemson rushing defenses of old that we've seen. Clemson's rushing defense is 14th in the ACC. So I think that Wisner's going to be able to get going in this game, and I think that Texas is going to be able to establish the run. So those are a couple keys that I'm looking at here.
Yeah, I'm with you there, especially on the Texas defense part. You mentioned earlier the Clemson versus South Carolina game. Clemson only scored 14 points in that one. They also played Georgia at the beginning of the year, week 1, so a long time ago. But I think they managed 6 in that game. And even last week against, or 2 weeks ago now, against SMU in the ACC title game, obviously they scored 34 points and got the win. They only had 326 yards. They benefited a lot from early SMU turnovers and short fields. So at the end of that game, SMU had actually outgained Clemson pretty significantly, despite taking the L there. So I am worried for sure about the Clemson offense here because I just don't know if they have the firepower against a really, really good Texas defense, who, as you mentioned, has been the one side of the ball for Texas that has consistently shown up every single week and really won them a handful of games. So if I'm Clemson, you've got to figure out a way to run the ball, whether that's with Cade Klubnik and get him out in space. And they're going to need some big plays from those young wide receivers who have done a pretty good job, I think, as a whole, but can they do it in this big environment on the road remains to be seen. I'm looking at on the Texas side too. I think you're right. I think they'll try to get Wisner going on the ground, and just interested to see if Arch Manning comes into play here, in case they do have any trouble getting the ground game going. I could see if they don't have any trouble with Wisner, that is, establishing the run, I could see them not going to Arch. Not because they're not prepared to do so, but because if they can run, traditionally speaking, why show anything else with Arch and potentially hold that for later on in the playoff? But I do think, based on what we saw Texas do against A&M, where Arch did have several packages, one of which resulted in a touchdown, and then in the Georgia game, when they didn't use him, which was a bit of a head scratcher to me, seeing how much they did struggle to run the ball, I have to imagine these past couple, 2 weeks that they've had to prepare, they've done some self-scouting. Texas, if need be, will call Arch's number. I just don't know that they'll have to do it in this game. So I'm interested to see if Clemson can kind of force them to do that, or if Texas can run the ball with their running backs. Because I think if Texas can run the ball traditionally, then Clemson's really going to struggle here.
Yeah, that's I think Clemson's kind of between a rock and a hard place here. And here, Bo Hunton's with us again. Texas will destroy Clemson. Could be. We'll see. In my opinion, like I was saying, Clemson, they're between a rock and a hard place right here. And the reason I say that is because I mentioned it earlier, 14th rushing defense in the ACC, right? That's not your typical Clemson defense that you're used to. So if you're Clemson, if you're going to really try to stop the run, if you think that Texas is going to try to establish the run, which I imagine they believe they will, then you're going to have to load the box. You're going to have to, bring numbers into the box because your rushing defense is not that good. So you're going to have to overload it in order to try to stop them. If you do that, Quinn Ewers can pick you apart through the air. So it's a dilemma that most teams face when you face Texas. Georgia is the team who has, done it best. It was just take away one thing, force turnovers, right, and force Texas into field goals, and Texas has trouble in the red zone sometimes. So that was kind of Georgia's game plan. And then they schemed a couple things up with Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart, who did a great job disguising blitzes and disguising coverages. They did the best all year against Texas of doing that. And we saw that in the SEC championship game, and we saw that in the game mid-year. To me, Clemson is between a rock and a hard place, right, with what they're going to have to do. Pick your poison with Texas. And I just think that Texas probably has a little bit too much in this game in terms of talent. Right now, I just think they're a little bit above where Clemson's at.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably the smart pick, at least straight up. We, in case you're new here, we do go on with SEC After Dark after the show. That'll be at 9 p.m. Eastern, where we'll actually go through our picks against the spread for all these games. So more just talking keys here. But yeah, look, it's a 12-point spread. So saying Texas is going to win this game is not outlandish at all. I think it's probably more, likely that they'll cover. But the only thing I will say here, too, to kind of close this out is, Texas has been in this situation before. They were in the playoff last year. So I don't think they're going to be ill-prepared by any stretch of the imagination or overwhelmed by this moment, especially being at home. However, even in the ACC title game, Clemson was the underdog. Dabo, for all the crap he gets, is a very good coach. In particular, when Clemson is an underdog, whether it's, 10 years ago when they're going up against Bama in the playoff and nobody thinks they can win, and they do. So he might have some magic up his sleeve, with, I don't know, onside kick or something could be coming. I still worry, though, that they might need more than a little bit of magic in this game if Texas brings their A game. All right, the next SEC game, the nightcap, Saturday night, in the Horseshoe at Ohio State. The Buckeyes are 7.5-point favorites right now, which kind of surprised me. And that line hasn't moved much, I don't think, from when it first came out. So holding pretty steady there it's been, hovering, I think, between a touchdown and maybe slightly under at times. But Ohio State, 7.5-point favorite as of now against Tennessee. There's a lot of chatter on social media. I'm sure you've seen it from the Vol fans that they are going to take over the Horseshoe, and they're expecting 30,000, Tennessee fans to be there. So I'm fascinated to see that, because that I think is a underlying storyline of this game is of how well Tennessee fans will travel anywhere. So I have no doubt that there will be, enough people in Orange to fill 30,000 seats. I just don't know if they're actually going to get 30,000 tickets, right? I mean, how many tickets have become available in the secondary market? I don't know. I'm not perusing StubHub trying to go to this game. So they may very well pull this off and have a ton of fans there. But what I'm more interested in, what I'm trying to get at in terms of Ohio State and that home field advantage, which could be fantastic. It's a night game. It's in Columbus. It's the first ever, home playoff game in Columbus. At the same time, though, they're still kind of pissed off about losing to Michigan. They're still kind of wishy-washy about Ryan Day. So I really don't know. And again, we are more SEC centric around here. So I don't know what the vibes are in Columbus. I don't know if they're pumped up for this game. I'm sure they are to a certain extent, right? But are they going to sell a lot of their tickets? Are people kind of that mad where they would give that seat up? Because there are plenty of Vol fans that would snatch it up if so. And perhaps, even more practically speaking, even if it's 80, 90% Ohio State fans, what happens if they go into halftime and they're losing, 14-7 or 10-3? because Tennessee's defense is good. That defense is going to travel. We just saw what Ohio State's offense did against Michigan 2 weeks ago. So if this does not go well early for Ohio State, how does that crowd react?
It might be similar to something that we saw this year in Tiger Stadium, where boos start raining down and people start calling for coaches to be fired. Or maybe something like Texas, where you saw a whole bunch of bottles being thrown on the field against Georgia.
Yeah.
That's my question. That was, the question that I was going to pose is, okay, if all these Tennessee fans are traveling, like where is the pulse of the Ohio State fan base? Have they quit on Ryan Day? I think the answer is yes. I think they actually have, for the most part. I mean, I think they're excited about the playoff and Ryan Day can save his job. But you even have national media, and we're close to national media at this point, but national media are talking about how if Ryan Day loses this game, he probably he might get fired. Like they might run him out of Columbus, and that's a very real possibility. So I think the pulse of the Ohio State fan base is like, we're nearing flatline of the Ryan Day era unless he can revive it in this game. So that's wild. I don't know if you saw too. There was all the Vol chatter on Twitter. I saw that they have commandeered the horseshoe on Apple Maps to say Neyland North. So if you looked for a little while on Apple Maps, it said Neyland North, which I thought was awesome trolling. Great job, Vols fans. The big thing I'm looking at in this game is, I think the weather actually could potentially play against Ohio State, which sounds crazy, but I mean, it gets cold in Tennessee too. It's not like Vols are going to be, super scared of the cold. And the other thing is, look, Ohio State's offense has not. They're right, exactly. They're hoping that the weather can win it for them. I don't know that it can. I don't know that matters, right? It's going to be 27 degrees. It's going to be cold, but we're not expecting snow. We're not expecting any precipitation, so it should be clear. And then you've seen over the past, not a couple weeks necessarily, but at times during this season, right? Let's see, against Penn State, they win 20-13. They have to eke it out. Their offense doesn't look great. Last week against Michigan, their offense is just completely AWOL. If I'm the Vols, frankly, I'm not that scared of Will Howard. I'm really not that scared of this Ohio State offense, which isn't something you've always been able to say. So the Tennessee defense is very good, as you said. They're tied for third in scoring defense in the SEC. I think 13.9 points is what they give up a game, tied with Ole Miss. So they're coming in here. I think that they're going to come in with some moxie and some swagger, expecting that they're going to be able to shut this Ohio State offense down. And then on the other side, you've got Dylan Sampson, right? You've got a whole bunch of weapons for Nico. I expect Dylan Sampson to be able to get going. I don't think he's going to rush for 200 yards in this game, but I expect him to go over 100. And I also think Nico, this is the time for Nico to step up, right? He's had a kind of an up and down year. It hasn't been the blow it out of the water year that everyone was hoping for. However, he's still got Tennessee here, number 9 team in the country, and they've made it to the college football playoff. If you're Nico, now's the time. Now's the time to make that step. You got Ohio State on the road. If you can win this game, keep rolling in the college football playoff and, take it to the next level in terms of your career. It's time for him to step up. But those are the couple things that I'm looking at in this game. I'm really excited to watch this game. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think you bring up a good point about, the weather. I think our friend Bo Hunting brings up another good point here about if Tennessee can keep pressure on Howard, because I do think that's key here, right? I mean, Ohio State has fantastic weapons on the outside. Howard has been inconsistent this year in being able to use them and capitalize on those. Mm-hmm. And, especially when you think of, too, that they've got Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins in the backfield, but that offensive line for Ohio State, especially after the Seth McLaughlin, former Alabama center, transferred up there, was an All-American. He got injured late in the year. He's done for the season. And we saw in the Michigan game, Ohio State struggled to run the ball. And I don't know necessarily why, but they stuck to that sort of game plan of we want to run the football, and it did not work in that game. They're not going to be able to run the ball, I don't think, with much consistency against Tennessee. So to bow hunting 101's point, if when they are forced to pass, they can get Howard under pressure, I do think the Vols have a very good chance of winning, because if he has all day to throw, the Tennessee secondary, we're splitting hairs here because the Volunteer defense has been awesome. But I do think if there's a weakest part of that unit, it is the secondary. So it's possible they could get some guys open downfield, but of course Howard has to have time, and that Tennessee front seven is nasty. So I think that battle between the Vol front seven and the Ohio State offensive line will be huge. All right. Those are two SEC games. We'll probably spend a little bit less time on the next two, just because I don't watch a ton of Indiana or Notre Dame. But we can start off with the Friday night game there. Indiana goes to Notre Dame, the 10-7 matchup. Notre Dame favored by 7 right now. Again, I didn't watch a ton of these teams all year, so I don't have a ton to say here, perhaps, other than I do think this will be a very close game. I think Indiana, as we've seen all year, is pretty much ready for the challenges. And, of course, they got blown out by Ohio State, but I don't think Notre Dame is Ohio State, at least offensively. What are your thoughts on this game?
This is a fascinating game. Indiana going, up the road to Northern Indiana to take on the Fighting Irish. We got 3 games this weekend. They're going to be frigid, under freezing temperatures. This is one of them, 27 degrees. The only one that's not is obviously the one in Austin. That one's going to be, I think, in the 60s. Again, no precipitation, I don't think, for any of these games is what we're looking at. It's going to be clear skies, but it'll be cold for 3 of them. So this one in South Bend will be chilly. So it'll sting on your hands, if you're a wide receiver on the outside. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy to throw the ball either. So these are 2 of the best scoring offenses in the country. I think they're both in the top 3, I believe, in scoring offense. So also have pretty good defenses as well. So they, Indiana, again, people know, if you've been watching college football or even just paying, some sort of attention to the Big Ten this year, Indiana's schedule hasn't been that good, right? So maybe they're racking up a whole lot of stats, and maybe their ratings are inflated based on their schedule, which has not been that good. However, they do have the top rushing defense in the country. And Notre Dame has a top 10 rushing offense in the country. So that Notre Dame is going to try to establish the run. So that's what I'm looking at here is Notre Dame, with Riley Leonard and their stable of backs, able to establish the run against Indiana. I think they are going to be able to. I do think that Indiana's stats and ratings are inflated a little bit based on that schedule. But that's the main thing that I'm watching here. And if it's the case that they aren't able to establish the run and they're really having trouble on the ground, the weather could play a factor there. And you're also looking at Notre Dame has the 101st passing offense in the country. So they want to establish the run. And if they have trouble doing that, Indiana can be in this game, because Indiana's got a really solid offense as well. Notre Dame's got a great defense too. Should mention that as well. So I think this is going to be a really fun game. It'll be really interesting to see. And hey, if Cignetti can walk in and get a playoff win in his first year with rivals up the road at Notre Dame, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it really would be. And I agree. I think Notre Dame's going to try to establish the run. I think Riley Leonard is a good quarterback, but I think, he benefits a lot from using his legs. I think that his legs will be a factor in this game. But if Indiana, who has a very good rush defense, can force them to throw, that's where I think we could see Notre Dame perhaps get into a little bit of trouble here. But yeah, I'm with you. I think this is just going to be a really close game. I think it's a good matchup. I think both teams will be ready. I think Marcus Freeman, especially being at home, those guys are going to be jazzed up to play. And Indiana, again, with the exception of the Ohio State game, has just not flinched all season. And even in that game, I think it was less about them, flinching. I think they came out there and had a good plan. They just ultimately, they did not have the guys to match up with Ohio State. And that could potentially hurt them here, but I don't think Notre Dame quite has the caliber of athlete that Ohio State does, at least on offense. Ohio State put up, I think, 38 on Indiana. Not sure Notre Dame is going to get that high, which just lends itself to most likely a close, hard-fought game. So, yeah. Definitely excited for that one, especially because it is the first one that we'll get to see on Friday night. And then Saturday, Penn State gets another noon game. I'm sure they're thrilled about that in State College, but they get SMU, number 11 SMU at number 6 Penn State in Happy Valley. Penn State is an 8.5-point favorite in this game. What are you looking at in this matchup?
On the Nittany Lions side, I'm looking at a couple things. First of all, turnovers have been an issue at times for Drew Aller. He's only thrown 7 picks on the year. However, they've come at critical times in critical games in big situations. That includes last week, right? Against Oregon, he had two picks, 2 at critical times. It turned into 7 points for Oregon in the first half. And in the second half, Penn State was driving late in the game and had a chance to tie the game if they scored on that drive. And Drew Aller throws a pick. So I want to see if SMU is able to turn Penn State over. If they're able to turn Penn State over and, fluster Drew Aller and get him off schedule and, create a couple turnovers, SMU will be right in this game. So that's one key I'm watching. And SMU has the second best defense in the ACC. So Penn State can create turnovers as well on the other side of the ball. So that's something to watch out for. On the year, they're +5 in turnover margin. But SMU's defense is no slouch either. So I'm really watching. We've talked about it before. James Franklin, big games. They melt. It's SMU, right? Everybody's kind of writing them off. It's like, okay, Penn State, look at the roster, right? Look at the talent level. Look at the blue chip ratio. Penn State should win this game, no doubt about it. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Just kind of look at some of the fundamentals, look at some of the stats, where these teams rank at. And then also just like kind of the cultures of programs, right? And looking at history, James Franklin, they kind of melt down in big games. And if they melt down in this first iteration of the 12-team playoff in the first round, Happy Valley might burn. So I think Penn State is kind of up against a wall in this one, right? Like the pressure is on Penn State. SMU doesn't have much pressure on them at all. They're not supposed to be here. So they can play free and loose. While Penn State, I wonder if they're going to be, kind of coming into this game tight. So that's something to watch for.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, what I'm looking for in this game, a couple things. So you mentioned SMU has a good defense. In particular, they have a good defensive line. They're very good at getting after the opposing team's quarterback, which could hurt Aller here, who, like you said, is a little bit prone to potentially throwing some interceptions. And they're really good at stopping the run as well. Again, I mentioned last week they held Clemson, or conference title week, they held Clemson to 326 total yards. I think Penn State's offense is probably a little bit better than Clemson's, but they are not an unbeatable, offense, right? And we've seen them turtle up the Ohio State game, for instance, in a big game against a really good defense. So I'm very interested to see how the SMU defense does in this game, because I do think from a physicality standpoint, Penn State will be the most physical team that they have played to this point, especially with that offensive line. I did not think, just as an example, right, going into the Big Ten title game, I thought Penn State, I thought their offense was going to turtle up again, because I thought, hey, Oregon's got a good defense. We see them do this all the time in big games. And they did not. I mean, in matter of fact, they kind of punched Oregon in the mouth. You mentioned the 2 turnovers. That was really the difference in the game. Otherwise, Penn State was running all over them. I mean, they had, I'm looking at it now, Katron Allen, 124 yards and a touchdown on 14 carries. Nick Singleton, 105 yards on 10 carries. Drew Aller, 54 yards on 5 carries. So they were running at an unbelievable yards per carry clip against Oregon. So if they can even, get 75% of that production against SMU, then the Mustangs will be in trouble, because I do think on the flip side, I think SMU is going to struggle offensively, because yet again, we're trying to take, nuggets from other games here and try to see how they'll translate. And SMU did get things going against Clemson in the ACC title game eventually, I think Penn State has a better defense than Clemson, right? And so, okay, like, what's the number SMU needs to get to in this game? It's got to be, to me, somewhere in the 20s at least, I think, to win. Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to have, they could do it, but they're going to have to play very, very tight offensively, because I do think the weather, especially team from DFW, even just the cold weather, especially in offense, it could be a little bit of a factor. And I think the Penn State defense for years has just been so sound and disciplined and physical. And I expect them to bring that on Saturday. So interested to see, how the battle goes up front for that SMU defensive line against Penn State. And then very interested to see Rhett Lashley's just game plan on offense, to how he thinks he can attack this Penn State defense, who I think will be the best unit SMU has seen all year on that side of the ball.
Yeah, without a doubt. That's going to be a fun game. I'm really looking forward to watching that one, as I am all these games. I think I've said that after every single one, but I'm giddy at this point. I'm just ready to kick it off. Yeah,
I would agree. All right, I think we can kind of move on here. We do have a bowl game coming up on Friday afternoon in the SEC. Florida is playing Tulane in the Union Home Mortgage Gasparilla Bowl. So call your mom and dad, make sure that they know that the Union Home Mortgage Gasparilla Bowl game is on television. I think it's at like 3:30 on Friday afternoon. Don't think we need to spend much time on this. I'll just briefly say, we kind of just saw Tulane go up to Army, get waxed. Florida should be up for this game with Lagway and, the kind of momentum that they have. So I would expect Florida to handle their business in that one. Transfer portal. There's a lot of stuff we can get into here. We can start out by just saying that the college football calendar is insane, because you had National Signing Day 2 weeks ago. Transfer portal opened right around the same time after the conference title games. And we still have teams trying to play in bowl games, and then the select few, the top 12 that made the playoff, and they're dealing with, transfers from their own teams / potentially missing out in the portal, or trying to recruit while they're trying to prepare for games. And it's really just a mess.
Yeah, I think we're headed for some upheaval here. You've heard coaches from across the sport they've been really frustrated with it for a while. And we just changed it. Last year they changed it so we have the portal window now. And now we're seeing the calendar, and that it hardly makes any sense. Like, how are you as a coach and as a program supposed to be working on your bowl game preparation while you have kids leaving the program? And then you also are supposed to be, trying to figure out the kids that are going to be coming into your program the next year. And then on top of all of that, not only are you worried about that, but you also are having to be a GM in a sense that you have to figure out your NIL puzzle pieces for that, right? With all the money. Okay, well, what's the money allocation going to look like and how much money do we have overall? How much money can we give, to this position group? Do we have enough to get this cornerback at a 5-star level, or do we have to go at the 3-star level? Like, there are so many moving pieces for coaches right now. I just think it's untenable, right? And that's why you also see, we saw it, an hour or so before we came on tonight, is, Greg Byrne at Alabama is putting out huge diatribe on Twitter trying to get Alabama fans to donate to their NIL collective. And it's not just Greg Byrne. That's happening, across the SEC and across college football. And that's because it's just, the money is just going through the roof, just constantly more money, so that we can go get players in the portal. And I just don't think we're at a place where that's tenable anymore. And I think the calendar is also just going to change, especially when you think about it. And James Franklin made this point the other day in his press conference. You saw the backup quarterback for Penn State is in the transfer portal. And the poor kid, he has made it public that he did not want to leave at this time. He wanted to go through the playoff with his teammates, and he loves playing at Penn State, and he loves being there. He loves his teammates, but he's looking at the roster and what they have coming in and realizing that, I'm probably not going to be the starter at Penn State going forward. And so I would like to transfer and go somewhere else. But because of the calendar, I can't do that. Like I can't wait until the last second. The portal is closed on December 28th. So he cannot, if Penn State continues to go through the college football playoff, he can't even go through the whole time in the college football playoff with his teammates. And James Franklin was very frustrated with this, and he made that point in his press conference. And I've heard it from others as well, right? There's many other coaches who have talked about this. Mike Elko talked about how ridiculous the calendar is in his press conference this week. So I do think that there's going to be some changes this offseason in terms of the calendar yet again. I understand that you're also up against the academic calendar, and that's where the issue lies. But you may just have to, tighten the window of the transfer portal and put it on the back of these bowl games, because there's just too many things going on. And these, the college football, the way the programs have changed just in the last 5 years is astronomical. These programs cannot keep up with all the changes and the amount of money that has to go here, and the new departments that you need to have within your program to keep up with all this stuff. So it's hard to feel bad for a coach who's making $12 million a year or $7 million a year or what have you. But at the end of the day, it's just too much for one person to really stay on top of, and a program to stay on top of.
I totally agree. And to piggyback off of one thing you brought up there around the NIL situation, the calendar, as you mentioned, I think is untenable. I think there are changes coming. We'll see exactly what those are. But so is the NIL situation, because there's been multiple coaches that have spoken out about this for years now, right? The tampering, kids being taken advantage of, right? Getting unsolicited calls from quote unquote agents who are not really agents, but they're acting like an agent and saying, hey, I just heard from school X that said, if you enter the portal, they'll give you X amount of money. And it's like, these kids aren't even in the portal. They don't even know these people. But hey, if this is true, I might want to take you up on this offer, random, agent who just called me. And I think that, to try to put a bow on that and how it's untenable, it's not just untenable for the coaches and players, it's also untenable for the fans. In what world are the fans responsible for paying the salaries? I know we don't want to call them a salary or whatever because it's NIL money, but that's what it is. Fans are not responsible for paying salaries for the teams they root for. So the idea that, your NIL collective and stuff is built on the back of fans, which it is now. I'm not saying, it's not. That's clearly the reality we're living in. But that is not a long-term reality that's tenable, because it's uneven, totally uneven between different, programs and the kind of donors and funds that they have. But it's just wrong, right? You buy tickets to the game, you buy merch, you do all this stuff. Oh, and by the way, all the stuff that you're already doing, you're donating to the alumni association, you're donating to the athletic department. We also need you to bankroll our roster. That makes no sense in any reasonable world. And so I think we're going to see a change here. I mean, I don't know if you saw this. I'm sure you saw that Brian Kelly was donating, or, whatever, some of his salary back. Again, that makes no sense. The head coach of a program is now indirectly, but directly paying, and I don't want to bag on Brian Kelly. I think it's a totally reasonable thing for him to do, because he's got plenty of money, right? And if he thinks that their NIL fund is lacking relative to competitors, well, hey, I'll throw a couple mil in there and sweeten the pot, and it's paying off in the transfer portal already. But that's also crazy, right? Your head coach should not be funding the NIL. If you can't pay your head coach what he's owed because you have to fund NIL, then guess what? He needs to take a pay cut, and those you can't have your head coach paying players directly to come play for him. That's also stupid. And the other thing I saw, again, insanity out of Louisiana. It was some kind of a marketing thing. I didn't read too much into it, but it was from the Louisiana State Legislature. They had some sort of a marketing plan based off of funds that they won in some settlement. So the state of Louisiana had sued somebody, and got a settlement out of it. And as it was an anti-vaping campaign, that's what it was. They had sued Juul, the vaping company, and won a settlement as the state. And part of the funds that they won are being given to LSU NIL Collective to have players participate in a anti-vaping campaign, which again, I'm not faulting the legislature, LSU, anybody for doing this, because the rules allow for such things. But yet again, that is madness. The state should not be funding directly football players. And I know, you get open a whole rabbit hole here of, well, states are already funding universities, blah, blah, blah. Yes, to a certain extent they are, but they're not paying players directly. Yet again, it's coming from fans, coaches, state governments now. Like, eventually, it's got to come from the school. I mean, we're just beating around the bush here in every way we possibly can, and none of it makes any sense.
Yeah, there's two other things I'll say on it. So one is that it also kind of comes across as tone deaf, right? And it's like, okay, I know that Greg Burns, I don't know what he makes a year, $3 million a year, right? His salary is the AD. Or, a Brian Kelly who's making $10 million a year, like what have you. It comes across as tone deaf for you to be soliciting even more money from your fan base who's paying for season tickets and concessions. And, they already are part of your academic club, right? They're giving money to the institution already. It's just constantly milking money from folks, and you're sitting up here in your ivory tower making $10 million a year, and you're asking your plumber, your regular 9-to-5 guy, like all these other people who are in your fan base, hey, we need you to give $5. It's like a political campaign, chip in $5 today or we're going to lose to LSU next year. Like, it's craziness. That's nuts. So I think that does have to change. But I understand though, at the end of the day, like, even Brian Kelly making $10 million a year, Greg Byrne making $3 million a year. Like, even them giving some of their salaries, yes, they're making a lot of money. Yes, they're wealthy, but like, they're not going to be able to fund the NIL program, with that money. So like, a lot of other people have to give money if that's how we're doing this right now. The system is just nuts. The other thing I'll say is that I do think we're headed for, and I know that there's stipulations right now why we cannot do this, but we're headed for some sort of contracting, right? Like, there's just no way that kids, whether they don't play a lot and whether you're a backup, right, a former 4-star backup who feels like he should be playing and gets in the portal and thinks he can go somewhere else, whether it's a lower school or what have you, or a player that has a really good year, above average year, a Dylan Stewart at South Carolina, right? Like, it's just free agency every year. It kind of doesn't matter who you are. Why would you not go in the portal, and just test your market value, which is what you touched on. All these agents are calling these kids behind the scenes and saying, hey, I've got 4 schools right now that'll give you X amount of money, which then just starts a bidding war with the school that you're at, or they just say, to hell with it. I don't care. Go to Kansas or wherever, So with the amount of money that's now being thrown around, we're talking about millions of dollars for some of these kids, right? Dylan Stewart, the number that was thrown out for him was like 1.5 million. I've heard on other podcasts, like for Jackson Arnold, some of the money was being thrown around for him. The numbers were in like $2 to $3 million range for Jackson Arnold, who didn't have a very good year. So that sort of money that's being thrown around at this point, we're going to get to a point where schools are just like, this is not okay. If we're going to be paying this sort of money for a kid, it can't be on a 1-year flyer. We're going to have to do this over 2 to 3 years and, stretch this out, because the money's just not there at the end of the day, no matter how you spin it, whether it's the fans that are paying for it or whether eventually it becomes the schools that are paying for that.
Yeah, I agree. Anyway, rant over on that. I think we've touched enough on that, and there's plenty of time to dig deeper into that, in shows later on. In terms of the portal right now, we do have some SEC schools that are making some waves. So this is very fluid, right? I think a lot of this will change, not just with more people entering the portal, more people committing, but even as we've learned over the years, portal commitments are very different than a high school commitment because they're not actually signing a letter of intent. There's not really anything that's holding them to this other than a verbal commitment until they actually enroll in the spring semester. So this could change. But as it stands now, Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, the Portal King, is back at it. They have the number 1 ranked class according to 247 Sports right now. They have 9 commitments, including several 4-stars in there. LSU, as I mentioned earlier, seems to be very aggressive in this portal window with, I guess, again, their revamped NIL program. They have the number 3 transfer portal class, 9 commitments so far. Auburn, also very aggressive, as I think many expected, with Hugh Freeze' seat getting a little bit uncomfortably warm and them not really spending last year in the portal. I think they're being a lot more aggressive. They have the number 4 portal class with 9 commitments so far. A&M, I think, also not really a surprise. Elko was very into the portal last year, and he's still getting his feet underneath him as a coach, right? So there's probably and there's been a lot of transfers out of A&M. So I think, he's still trying to get his guys, his culture established, and they've got the number 5 portal class, actually with only 5 commits so far. So pretty impressive that they're up there in the top 5 with that small number. Mississippi State, we'll get to them a little bit more later as possibly part of kind of the loser segment here too. But they're actually have the number 7 overall class. Again, Jeff Lebby going into year 2, I think will be very aggressive here. They've had a ton of attrition as well of guys entering the portal, but they are doing a good job thus far of backfilling a lot of those spots, including, I think, Luke Kromenhoek from Florida State was probably one of the bigger ones. So here are some of the bigger names that we've seen enter enter and find a home. I mentioned LSU. I think what stands out to me when I look at this list as a whole is, teams are, being aggressive in the portal in the SEC, but they're also being aggressive, tactfully and trying to fill gaps in their roster, right? A&M, for example, struggled at wide receiver this year. They didn't have any game breakers. Well, they got Micah Hudson, the former 5-star from Texas Tech, including several other wide receiver commits so far, in this class. Mario Craver from Mississippi State, another productive freshman that's transferring to A&M. Auburn didn't have a quarterback. They go get Jackson Arnold. LSU, I think, is loading up pretty heavy on the defense. You see Jack Pyburn here, the edge from Florida. There's several other. I think they got a cornerback from Florida. They got another edge player. Can't remember where he was at. So LSU is really going hard at defense as well as wide receiver because I think they lost some wide receivers, probably one to the NFL. I know they had one going to the portal as well. Berrien Brown is a big pickup for LSU. They picked up Nick Anderson from Oklahoma. It's another big pickup. And Ole Miss has, I don't know, they're filling some guys on the defensive line. Prince Will Umanmielen, the edge from Nebraska, brother of Prince Lee Umanmielen. They're completely raiding Arkansas's roster. They have multiple commits from Arkansas. So pretty active portal so far. Interested to see how it turns out. Anything to say on this stuff before we get into kind of the biggest losers from the portal so far?
Not a ton. I think you hit on most of it. I'm interested to see Jackson Arnold at Auburn. That's going to be interesting to see how that one plays out. And then, like you said, I really like what LSU and what Texas A&M are doing in the portal in terms of addressing needs. A&M had trouble at wide receiver this year. They're still also, I think, in the running for, unless news has broken and I missed it, Kevin Concepcion from NC State. I think they're still in the running for him. But they got, 2 solid wide receiver prospects. I'm a little concerned that Micah Hudson at Texas Tech, he was a former 5-star. I figured that kid would have had 50 catches this year, right, for a lot of yards. And he had like 8 receptions for like 50 yards. So little surprised at that. In the portal, he was a 4-star, so we'll see if Colin Klein at A&M is able to utilize him better. And then for LSU, they're going hard and they're addressing needs, right? You've got Darian Brown, a wide receiver, but Pyburn right at edge. The issues for LSU really are on defense, and they're addressing a lot of those needs. They took that kid from Virginia Tech, the cornerback.
Yep.
They got Jakeem Jackson, who you mentioned from Florida, the other cornerback. So they're going really hard in the portal at that at the DB spot, which is what they needed. I mean, they've had so many issues on defense. And I said this weeks ago, talking about LSU, that I expected why am I forgetting the defensive coordinator's name right now? Guy from Missouri. Blake Baker.
Oh, yeah, geez, what is his name?
Blake Baker.
Yeah.
Baker, I thought based on what I was seeing from LSU's defense, I think that guy's a great defensive coordinator. And I figured when we got to mid-year and they were still having so many issues that he was going to go really hard in the portal, and that Brian Kelly would give him free reign, just like, hey, find whoever you want and we'll go get them. And it seems like that's what's going on right now. So, really a lot of movement in the SEC. It's been interesting to watch. Still a long way to go. December 28th is when it closes out. And then the last thing I'll say is some movement at Clemson. Dabo Swinney in the portal. Hasn't been for a long time. Now it looks like they got a couple commitments. So it looks like he's changed his philosophy on that a little bit. I doubt they'll take a big class, but he's got 2 or 3 commitments right now. So interesting to see that.
Yeah, and before we move on, just to close out the portal, we mentioned some big losers. I think in the SEC, the two that have really stood out so far. I think Kentucky is probably worth mentioning here, almost like an honorable mention, just because they lost those 2 receivers, which are really, really good players. But Arkansas has had 28 players transfer out. They have 6 commitments from the portal as it stands now coming back in. So kind of a mass exodus in Fayetteville right now. That's really tough, especially, when you have a guy like Sam Pittman, who was kind of on the hot seat coming into the year. Obviously he, saved his job this year, but seems like there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff and players kind of reading the tea leaves that this may not be a long-term type of a thing and are trying to get out before things get real bad. I hope I'm wrong. Obviously, I don't want to wish ill on Pittman or Arkansas, but that's alarming to see that many guys hit the portal for a coach who, has been there a long time, has been established. He's not a newcomer. He's not changing the culture, right? It is what it is, and guys are opting out, very, very often. So tough to see for Arkansas. And then Mississippi State. Again, not too surprising here. They've had 24 players entering the portal. I mean, they went 2-10, and it was Jeff Levy's first year. So the attrition doesn't surprise me too much. But I think they messed up on Michael Van Buren. What do you think about all that? That with the Jackson Arnold, kind of overtures, and then ultimately Van Buren kind of says, "Okay, if I'm not wanted here, I'm going to hit the portal," and ends up at LSU.
Yeah, as an Aggie fan, it kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Kevin Sumlin with Kyle Allen and Kyler Murray kind of thing, although they were both on the roster at A&M. But, we don't exactly know how this all went down, but you can kind of read between the lines and when this stuff happened. I've been saying since early in the year that he should be their main focus, right? Michael Van Buren, he played very well, overall for Mississippi State this year. He showed a lot of promise in multiple games this year. So it was a little surprising to see the smoke come out that it really came down to 2 schools, right? It was Auburn and Mississippi State coming down, to the end for Jackson Arnold. So I didn't like that at all. And obviously Michael Van Buren didn't either. After that smoke came out, he then entered the portal, and now he's at LSU. It's like, yeah, dude, Michael Van Buren is a solid quarterback. No wonder, LSU went after him, and a bunch of other schools did. So I really thought that was severely mishandled. Maybe Van Buren was going to enter anyway, and, so that was why Levy was going after Jackson Arnold. But it just surprised me. It was like, you know what? If anything, I'm trying to tell that kid, you're our guy, 100%. We'll do whatever it takes to make you happy, and we're going to build around you. And that's what I would also have been telling receivers as well. They lost a lot of production, right, with Mario Craver and a couple of other receivers. They lost a lot of that offense that you were hoping that Jeff Lebby could build around. So thus far, don't love what's been happening in the portal for Mississippi State with those outgoing. Like you said, they brought in the former 4-star from Florida State, Krokenmeyer, however you say his name, Kromenhoeker.
Kromenhoek, yeah.
I sound like the guys from the Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, right.
Rigma.
Rowan Gardner.
But hey, that kid's unproven. We don't know a lot about him, so we'll see what happens. Michael Van Buren had some games under his belt. So anyway, not great. Definitely the two biggest losers of the portal for the SEC so far.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, we'll have plenty more to talk about as more commitments come down, more transfer portal entrants, etc. I would expect after this first round of playoffs, the 4 teams that lose will probably have a decent amount of transfers hit the portal there, which could really swing things. If any of those guys end up committing to SEC or other SEC schools, depending on where they're coming from. But so we'll keep tabs on that. Obviously, our newsletter will be filled with transfer portal updates and news. And when we hop back on the show, we'll discuss any big updates there. Well, we're doing good on time, and I think we're pretty much ready to close it out. So we've got our 2 final segments. I will hand it over to you for our Muschamp Coach of the Week. Didn't have a ton of options this past week, obviously. So I think most people can guess that this is likely going to the coach of one of the service academies.
Yeah, we probably could have skipped it had one of the coaches not really shown us a whole lot of the spirit of Will Muschamp. However, there was one coach that did. I will say, too, for the SEC Bowls, we got a bunch of bowl games. Would have loved to get to all of them tonight, but a little bit tough to do that with so many games. Maybe we can do one next week. We'll see. A lot of these games are on like the 27th, so maybe we'll do an emergency pod on the 26th or something, and we just preview the games for about a half hour. We'll see. We'll figure that out, and you guys can check back on social media if we end up doing that. For Muschamp Coach of the Week, though, we had a great matchup. It was a lot of fun. If you guys watched Army-Navy, and you had Jeff Monken, the coach of Army. Before the game, he went on the Pat McAfee show, and they were talking to him. And he had an interesting comment before the game, and that's going to set it up real quick. So here is Jeff Monken's comments before the game.
Has the thought crossed your mind yet that, hey, we might be playing Navy in the conference championship, and then, of course, for the Army-Navy game the next week, that you guys might be playing back-to-back games?
Do they still have a football program at that
Oh! Love it.
So a little bit of hubris there from Jeff Monken. And as we all know, Navy ended up winning the game. They were not expected to. They were the underdogs. And they were going up with, I think Army was 11-1, and I think Navy was 8-3. And Navy kind of dominated the game. It was a fun one to watch. And Navy kind of ran it up and down on them. So after the game, here is the Navy coach.
Coach, an Army-Navy victory. The Commander-in-Chief trophy is now secured. Your first time as a head coach. Does it get any better than this?
It doesn't. I'll tell you what, we still got a football team in Annapolis, and so happy for these players.
Eat that, Jeff Monken. So Brian Newberry getting the win for Navy, his first win as the Muschamp Coach of the Week. And so congratulations to Brian Newberry. Well-deserved. Stuffed a sock in their mouth.
Yeah, impressive stuff. I picked against Army when they played Tulane, and then thought Army was unbeatable. So I picked Army in the Army-Navy game and got stuffed into a locker yet again. So congratulations to Navy for winning the Commander-in-Chief trophy.
Definitely. Again, that was a fun game. So, all right, take us out here. You got kind of a little surprise here. You had a heck of a week. Hammer was in the woods, and I think y'all ought to check this out. Hammer, show us your buck here.
Yeah, so normally we do the biscuit of the week to close out the show, but we didn't have any great biscuits this week, and we weren't really on top of it on social media. And again, without there being a real college football Saturday slate, we just weren't on our biscuit game where we normally would be Saturday morning, parked in front of the TV. So, yes, Elmer Fudd, I guess, is me this week, but I, big deer hunter, been hunting pretty hard this year, had not gotten opportunity till this past weekend on Sunday evening, Sunday afternoon. This big fella walked out and was able to thankfully put a good shot on him and harvest that deer. So did not even have any camera pictures of him, did not know he was around, and just happened to be in the right spot at the right time. Biggest buck I've ever shot in my life, so was pretty jacked up about it. So yeah, that buck is taking the place of the biscuit of the week, with, so we'll have to make some, venison sausage biscuits here soon. That will be on the agenda this coming weekend. We have a lot of meat, to process out here. So exciting stuff.
Yeah, I think you might have a nickname. We got to figure out what the nickname is. I don't know if Elmer Fudd works. Maybe the International Harvester or something.
Yeah,
that would be
right.
good.
Yeah, IH, that's me, International Harvester.
Yeah, so we'll be back with Biscuit of the Week next week. We will not have a show. We may have a show next week. Like I said, maybe we'll figure that out if we can make it work. Otherwise, we probably will not be on January 1st, which would be the show after next week, because there's going to be a bunch of games on that day. So we may try to do a show before that, maybe on like the 30th on Monday, before we get to New Year's Eve. So be on the lookout on social media for what we decide to do there.
Yeah, as Bossman mentioned, obviously next Wednesday, Christmas Day, we're not going to do a show, and then the following is New Year's Day, which is riddled with the second round playoff games, wall to wall, noon to night. So we're not going to do a show in the middle of those games. That would be foolish, A, for our audience, and B, we would prefer to watch those games than do a show. So next show will be up in the air when it is. As Bossman mentioned, keep an eye out on socials. We will be doing one. Just got to figure out when. We've got a bunch of stuff going on for the holidays as well, as I'm sure you all do. So
that's if YouTube doesn't kick us off for showing a dead deer.
True. Yeah, we might get flagged. That's a good point. We're flagged for whatever sensitive content warning on this video.
Harvested.
We showed a picture of a deer, but anyway, that will do it for us tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. We're pretty tidy tonight, just over an hour, which is great for us. We usually go pretty long, so appreciate y'all tuning in. Again, we will keep y'all posted on when the next show will be. Just a reminder before you close out, please consider signing up for our newsletter. It's free, twice a week, Monday, Friday during the season. We typically go to once per week during the off season. So after the playoff and all that is done, we'll stop spamming your inbox twice a week. We'll go down to once a week. And again, we are Biscuits and SEC. We do this show typically Wednesday nights at 7:30 Eastern. Would love for you all to join us later tonight on SEC After Dark at 9 p.m. Eastern, where we will pick all of the games for this coming week. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. That will do it. Appreciate y'all.